I know you've been thinking it's been years since Gwen has made a video. What's happened to her? Well, I decided to make a video for this week in talking about childhood and the Victorian era. Now, both of the works that we are reading for this week, Oliver Twist and Alice in Wonderland, are from the Victorian era and from two famous works from two very famous authors, Charles Dickens and Lewis Carroll. And these works, while produced in the same era are widely divergent. Oliver Twist is very realistic, it's very gritty, and in part it is based on Charles Dickens' experiences when he was a young boy. His father was sent to debtor's prison, and in that time, when somebody was sent to debtor's prison, the whole family usually went. Mom, the kids went along with dad to the prison. Now, Dickens was sent out to work at a very early age, and of course his family was very poor, obviously, and this had a long-lasting effect on him. And even though he was very rich and very successful later in his life, he never outgrew those experiences he had when he was a young boy, and they are reflected in many of his works, not only in Oliver Twist, but also in Hard Times, which is a huge indictment of education during the Victorian era, and also in Great Expectations. But Oliver Twist is what we are reading for this week, and which I want to say a few words about, and also about the Victorian era in general. Oliver Twist, as I said, is very gritty and it is realistic. And of course it chronicles the life, well, not the whole life, of the young orphan Oliver Twist and how badly he is treated by the system. And the system was representative of course, the whole government. And not just the government, but the attitude of the people in general. And aside from the aspects of how children are treated in this book and in the society, this is also an indictment of how poor people were treated in general. Poor people were seen as responsible for their plight in life. And we do see this somewhat today, but I'm not going to get into modern things. And the poor lived in segregated neighborhoods, and they were seen as criminals and lowlifes, and again were rather blamed for their own predicament in life. Within the Victorian era, we had the rise of the middle class, and we still had the nobility and the upper class people, but the poor people, they were just always there. And okay, that's kind of a truism, but within the Victorian era, it seemed to be even more pronounced. Prior to that, there had been a shift in the society or the general culture in England, and that it changed from an agrarian culture into a more pastoral culture. And by what I mean is the old feudal system died, and those serfs who had worked on the land were displaced. And especially for those landowners who went into sheep herding, you only needed one shepherd to watch the flock, whereas before you needed many serfs to till the ground. So where did these serfs go? They went to London, and they went into the lower class neighborhoods, and that made the urban population swell, and it made situations even more difficult. We talk about environmental issues today. Even before the London of the Victorian era, it was a very nasty place, very nasty. Open sewage on the streets, and just a horrible place to live. And so Oliver Twist finds himself in this place, and he is the lowest of the low. He is even lower than other children who are in the orphanage because he doesn't know who his parents are. Even somebody who knew his or her parents had more status than Oliver Twist, because at least he or she knew where he or she came from. And so Oliver is very mistreated, and of course everybody knows the famous scene where he asked for more and is berated and punished for asking for more food. This was a realistic aspect of orphans and of poor children in the Victorian era. Children worked in the factories, the rise of the Industrial Revolution. They worked in the factories. They were chimney sweeps. They worked in coal mines, especially in mines, because children were small and were able to get into places where adults could not get into. Same thing with a chimney sweep. A child could fit into a chimney much better than could an adult. And nobody saw any problem with this. Well, I shouldn't say no one saw any problem with it, because there were people who were working for reform, but there were no laws against child labor, and there were no prohibitions against hiring children to do this. And sadly, maybe even more sadly, children worked in brothels. And the dichotomy or the contradiction, I won't even say an oxymoron, it was sheer outright hypocrisy of a culture that was so straight-laced that they wouldn't say the leg on a piano because that was risque. It was a limb. Had children working in brothels. And again, they saw nothing wrong with this, and it was because they were poor children. So the poor children had it rather badly. Well, rather badly is a total and utter understatement. It was horrific, and not just for them. Admittedly, it was bad for men and for women, but for children, even worse, because they were children. Now, despite this realistic aspect of Oliver Twist, it also has a fairy tale and fantastical aspect. And you might say, Gwen, where is this? Well, you don't have to read the whole book, but if you did, you would see that later in the novel, Oliver is adopted by, and of course his name goes right over my head right now, but Oliver finds out that his mother was a sister of a very well-to-do man. And by happenstance, miraculously, Oliver meets this man, is taken into his home, then finds out that he is related to the man. And so everything is going to be great for Oliver. Oliver is going to have a nice house to live in, and he's going to have a clean bed. He's going to have as much food as he wants, and he is going to grow into money. This is the fairy tale aspect, because, hey, we want a happy ending, don't we? Well, Oliver Twist might have gotten his happy ending, but most children, by far, did not get the happy ending. So even though Dickens has this happy ending, perhaps it was the influence of an editor, and I have not read that it was, but it might have been the influence of an editor who said, you know, we can't let this novel end so depressing, even though other characters in the novel do die, and horrible deaths, but Oliver is saved. So it has that fairy tale aspect of, everybody lives happily ever after, except for those poor kids still in the orphanage. So despite the fact that it is really gritty and realistic, it also has fantastical or fairy tale aspects. I've said that several times now, and I'm being redundant, and excuse me on that. But overall, children were not well treated, except for the children of the well-to-do and the rich and the nobility. Oh, I just got a text message on my phone. It scared me. And I'm going to save those for another video in which I want to talk about Alice. Okay, now I'm looking at my phone to see who the text message is from. I want to make another video and talk about Alice and her status. But both of these books are coming-of-age books. But their coming of age are widely different in that Oliver comes of age because he is found and he is adopted. He didn't become a thief with Fagin. He looks forward to a new life, but Alice's experiences are quite different, and her coming of age is also quite different based on her social status, not just because she's a girl, but because of her social status. So I'm going to end there, and I'll talk about Alice next time, and I hope you're enjoying Oliver Twist.